If I can, if I can have everyone back to their seat, please, so we can resume our meeting. So that you can talk to Scott after. Okay, thank you very much, folks, and thank you for the 5-minute recess. I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Councillor Moffett. Councillor Moffett.
Thank you, and thank you to the people that came and spoke today with your concerns on the drain. And thank you to the engineer and city staff as well. There's a couple options that committee would have right now. I mean, we could just refer it back to the engineer to look at it again. That would take time. We likely wouldn't be back here until the fall to reconsider any updated report. We could just approve it as is, but I don't think that's going to be beneficial for some of the folks that spoke today. So what I'm going to propose is that we defer this for a month. So defer this until the May 2nd meeting of Agricultural Affairs Committee. So that'd be a month from today. Our drainage department will send out notice that that next meeting will be a meeting to consider municipal drain again. So we'll be back to this same process. Between now and then, I'd like to meet with Frank Cairo, Dan Loach, to see if we can discuss some of the challenges, some of the misconceptions, whatever discrepancies there seems to be between information sharing, and see if we can come to an agreement on whatever in that next month. If it becomes clear that no agreement can be reached or no common ground can be reached between now and then we don't really have a choice but to refer it back to the engineer, which again takes time, but the only way to address some of the issues would be to go back and look at that if that's our only option. I do think it's important to see if we can advance this, but under a premise that we can come to some sort of agreement on how to move forward. I'll commit to that. I'll make sure that we reach out and set up that meeting, and discuss, and get not just the two parties on their own, but myself involved, and then come back to our next committee meeting. So I'll be moving that. I'm just moving that deferral to that meeting.
Okay, so we have deferral on the table. I would like to ask our legal staff to explain the process and the next step where we are. I know that Councillor Moffett outlined if we do defer to the next meeting and hoping an agreement will be reached, but we still have to call for a meeting next month regardless. So I'll leave it for you to explain.
Chair, there are statutory requirements under the Drainage Act with respect to a drainage meeting, and so Samantha Montroy from our office is here to speak to the drainage issues. She's been the solicitor of record for this file.
Okay, Samantha?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as you said, in advance of the next meeting, we'll provide the report. The minimum requirement is 10 days notice prior to the meeting, so people will have an opportunity to respond.
So basically what we're saying today is defer going to be to the next ARAC meeting, May 2nd, and the notes will go out. If agreement been reached between the party, then the meeting on the May 2nd will be just to reach an agreement, basically. Is that it?
The agreement is not what would be before committee, but if an agreement was reached and the committee was comfortable making a decision, they could then accept the report, or they could choose to refer it back to the engineer.
Okay, that's great, but I would
if I could just add, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Okay,
just one comment. If
okay.
so, provided there's no changes to the design of the drainage works, that would have to be referred back to the engineer in that agreement. Yeah.
Yes, we heard from you earlier. But before we turn it back to Councillor Moffett, I would encourage the resident who spoke today, which is, I believe, 5 residents, maybe also can reach out to Councillor Moffett and get involved in that meeting so they can all be heard from, or Councillor Moffett can hear from you. Councillor?
Just want to, since that would be another meeting to consider, are the objections raised at this committee sufficient to warrant, let's say, Mr. Anderson not having to come back next month and say, I oppose this drain again?
Put your mic on.
Apologies.
So, okay.
The submissions and the comments made today will stay on the record for the committee, and they would be carried forward to the decision of the committee.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so on the front of us is deferral to the next meeting on deferral. Okay. All right, thank you very much, folks, and we move to item number 3, and it's Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development Department. We have a presentation from Mr. Schmidt.
Mr. Anderson guy left before I asked that.
Do you need Adam to click the mouse for you, or you're good? I said, do you need help from Adam with the presentation? All right, sir. We'll, okay, folks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a presentation on the departmental work plan, and actually, Mr. Willis, this year, for the first time in the department's history, rather than bringing forward work plan items to the specific committees that our department reports to, a decision was made to identify the entire departmental work plan and all of the committees that we report to, so every committee has a very good understanding of the breadth of sort of initiatives that the department is involved with within our various service areas. So it provides, I think, a much better context overall. And the report that's before you is broken down into different parts, and the different parts are actually directed to the specific committees associated with the work plan items that would be reporting to that particular committee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, as a quick introduction, at a very high level on the planning services, basically it's a continuation of planning services, Leanne Sneddon's group, bringing forward development applications, predominantly official plan amendments and rezoning applications, and the anticipation is that 2019 will be comparable to 2018. So you'll probably see the same level of activity. It might fluctuate a little bit here and there, but that's generally what we're anticipating will be before the committee, and that's predominantly the nature of the work that this committee would be dealing with from the planning services side of things. With respect to my particular area, economic development and long-range planning, we've got a few major initiatives that this committee and others across the organization are very well aware of. Is our official plan review process that's being launched, has been launched in March of this year, and the foundation for that document was Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, which is really setting a stage for a different type of a discussion as we develop our next official plan, really trying to position the plan in a way that's responsive to the ongoing challenges and needs that we need to be aware of, particularly as we move into the 21st century where things are coming out as much quicker than we've ever anticipated in the past, and we want to make sure that we have an official plan that builds in place resiliency, adaptability, and flexibility. It's a 2-year comprehensive review. The intent is that we're going to develop a brand new official plan. So that's going to be a big part of the work on the part of the policy planning group in my shop over the course of the next 2 years. Clearly the rural area is a big part of what will be addressed in the official plan. And we're really taking a hard look at how do we best position the policy directions for the OP once we get through that process. And the other thing that we've got on our work plan is the rural economic development strategy, and those two will very much link with each other and talk to each other and help to form each other. So we will definitely be coming back to this committee with respect to the policy directions that are going to be developing with respect to the rural area. We've got a discussion paper out right now which deals with the rural and also deals with the natural areas, much of which affects the rural areas. So that's out on consultation right now. The other big thing that we're dealing with in policy planning is the resolution of appeals to our current official plan. OPA 76, 150, and 180. And you dealt with one report earlier today, the resolution of appeals to 180, and we've been methodically trying to knock those down to the extent that we're able to, trying to get settlements and resolution, whatever remains outstanding, anticipating that we're going to be looking at LPAT hearings throughout 2019 to get final resolution of that. And again, it's been a long process to get through some of the appeals, which have now been in place for quite a number of years, and we're right back into the process of developing a new official plan. So the primary area that reports through this committee is our Rural Affairs and Natural Systems group. And this is just an indication of some of the key projects that are going to be undertaken by that group in 2019, really relating to rural monitoring and policy projects. And we've got the Fluellen Goulburn Special Study Area and Official Plan Amendment that is required to be coming forward. We anticipate that potentially before the summer. If that doesn't occur, likely in September sometime. Some sub-watershed plans are going to be coming forward, Beckett's Creek, Jock River. We've also got rural residential survey by our research and forecasting group. Another initiative that's been on our books for a while, as Councillor Deroux is very familiar with, is the ATV bylaw that we want to bring forward and get that resolution moving forward this year. And then various grants programs, a grants review update, and you dealt with another report this morning that also dealt with the rural grants program. So that's sort of a high level in terms of the rural affairs natural systems. The other big thing, in addition to the official plan, I think that's of particular interest to this committee, is our Rural Economic Development Strategy and Implementation Plan. And as I mentioned, that will link very much into the discussions that will be going forward as we start developing the policy framework through the new official plan that really relates specifically to the rural area. And I thought it worthwhile just to go through at a very high level sort of what that Rural Economic Development Strategy piece is really all about. And just a bit of a context, and I think those of you that are on this committee are well aware of it, a lot of other people not necessarily as aware, but the rural economy contributes roughly $1 billion to the GDP. It is one of the 4 pillars of the city's economic development strategy. It never really has been until we refreshed our economic development strategy and actually put rural economic development as one of the 4 pillars. The other 3 pillars being the knowledge-based industry sector, creative cultural industries and tourism, and then the other one being our sort of SMEs, Main Street business type areas. But clearly the rural is a big piece that we've identified. We need to pay attention to this because it's a big part of what Ottawa is and what Ottawa is all about. And it's really looking at the opportunity that we have in front of us to develop a very strong strategic framework for advancing economic development and economic growth within our rural area. And as I mentioned, it's going to be a big part of informing the new official plan as well. So with respect to an overall project overview, we're really looking at a scan of best practices and looking at what's out there in terms of programs and policies. Going to be very extensive internal, external stakeholder engagement and a comprehensive research study. We're bringing a consultant on board who has now been retained. That's going to be working with us and actually sort of understanding what the lay of the land is in Ottawa, but also looking at what's happening in other areas across the province as it relates to rural economic development. And the intent is really for that overall economic development strategy for the rural to be a piece of the city's broad economic development strategy, tying in with Rural Affairs Office initiatives, Ottawa tourism initiatives, and again, as I mentioned, informing the policy directions that would be set out in the new official plan. So the approach is basically 4 big sort of areas of focus: investigate, inquire, imagine, and implement. So we're now sort of in the investigation, moving into the inquiry stage, and then we'll start moving into looking at what those opportunities are, articulating strategic approaches, and identifying the things that we could be looking at, and then from that developing an overall 4-year action plan that we can actually make some meaningful progress in advancing the rural economic activity opportunities within the rural area. In terms of high-level scope, Really, what we're looking at is rural economy review and analysis, so looking at the population demographics, what's our economic base in the rural area, and as this committee knows, we've got a number of sectors that actually contribute to the economy. It's not just agriculture. We've got tourism out there, mineral aggregates out there. We've got our manufacturing, the activity that happens along the 400 series highways. So there's a whole bunch of different levels of activity that are going on, really trying to get a good understanding as to what that looks like and what that's all about. Looking at what our inventory assets are, looking at sort of a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis and overall performance analysis, as we talked before, best practices review, extensive internal, external stakeholder engagement. And we've gone out now to a couple of the key groups in Councillor El-Shantiri's ward and Councillor Darou's ward, really encouraging some of the rural stakeholder interests to really engage with us in a very active way as we start going through the process. And again, as I said, developing the overall 4-year action plan. Just indication of some of the key stakeholders, so external stakeholders, again, all sectors that really exist out there in the rural area. And then we've also got our internal sounding board, which is predominantly focused on the internal groups within the city itself. So, Mr. Chairman, that's a high-level overview. So, a snapshot in terms of where we're going as far as 2019 is concerned with respect to work plan items that report to this committee. 2 big things: official plan, a rural economic development strategy. I think are 2 areas that we really want to make sure that we're engaging with you on as we start going through the process on developing those. So, with that, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Well, first, thank you, Mr. Schmidt, for your presentation. And we don't have the same presentation you have. I would like you to send it to the committee member electronically so we can have that copy.
I think
you
Mark
have it
has
now. Okay, thank you. Any question to John before Councilor Meehan? Go ahead, put your mic on.
Hi, John, thanks.
Okay.
In terms of the stakeholders, one of the challenges that we face is the developers. Many of the developers own a lot of land in the rural areas, and can we consider them stakeholders in what we're doing?
Yes, they are stakeholders. Again, this is more focused on economic development. That would relate
No, but I mean,
more-
what they're doing though too affects the economy and affects the
Exactly.
everything. So,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
we've got developers that are involved in the mineral aggregate things. We've got developers that are involved in developing our rural villages. We've got those that are interested in that peri-urban area, areas that might come into the urban area. We've got development interests that are interested in opportunities around our interchanges with the 400 series highways. So absolutely, they're part of the equation as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Darou's.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. This is just not probably a question, but I just want to thank you, John, for this presentation. I know that the Rural Council and your shop have been working together. It's so nice to see actually that we have a plan in 2019 moving forward, specifically in the rural economy business. So we're very happy with the participation. We've been having lots of sessions in between all our rural ward and discussion with Councillor Shantiri and Councillor Moffat, and it's so nice to see the business associations are actually involved, and it's so nice to see that there is direct channel and line with your shop, and you've been engaged in most of those discussions. So I encourage you to keep that. We're very happy, and we appreciate all the work you and your shop does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Darou. Any other question from my colleague? No. Okay, John. There's so many balls in the air when we talk about rural economic development. And Councillor Gower and Darou's attended a meeting with Mr. Willis in CARP, and we talk about the villages and the economic development spin comes from the villages and the village business. And you and I were supposed to meet with Ottawa Tourism in the past. Okay, just to put it in a context to know where I'm coming from. Last year and the year before, the Diefenbunker Museum received between 75 to 80,000 people. They came to their bunker, they voted CARP is the most friendly town in Canada. We were happy with that, but they didn't spend a lot of money in CARP. And now we have brewery inside CARP, we have restaurants, we have Kinwine, which is, they make wine, they serve it, they sell it all on. What can Ottawa Tourism do to help connect in this and have the people who come to visit us in those museums, any other museum, whether Watson Mill, or how can we have them stay in and spend a little bit money in those communities?
So Councillor, that's an excellent point. You and I have chatted about this before, you're right. And Ottawa Tourism is now involved in, they've actually moved from a destination marketing organization to a destination development organization. That's really taking advantage of the MAT funding that's being made available with the additional accommodation tax. And they're now engaged in sort of looking at and developing an overall rural tourism strategy for Ottawa Tourism, and again, we see them as a key participant in developing the overall economic development strategy. And as we've talked before too, and I think this is something that those that are in the rural area know it intuitively, those that are not from the rural area don't necessarily appreciate it, but just like Ottawa is defined as an urban center with 80% of its land being rural, the rural communities, the villages, are not just the villages as defined by the boundaries in terms of where development happens. It's an experience, and I think we need to look at that as an asset, as an opportunity that up to this point in time we have not done a very good job on, and that's going to be a big part of what we need to be thinking about as we're looking at developing not only official plan policy, but also as we look at how can we capitalize on these economic development opportunities so that in fact when we do have events or facilities in the rural area that actually attract people to go out there, that we make sure that they're aware of the other opportunities that they can experience that rural lifestyle, that rural amenity, which is very much a part of what Ottawa is all about. So a big part of it, we don't have the answers, but they're definitely in the tent with us.
And the consultant you mentioned is going to help us. Would you be giving direction, or like how we're going to get the consultant involved also with the full picture of economic development, like to include the rural economic development? That's what I'm looking for.
So they've just been retained, and we're going to be sitting down with them and actually working out and having discussion with them. I mean, there was an initial meeting with them. My team is quite impressed with what they're able to bring to the table, so we want to make sure that everybody is aligned and moving forward in the same direction.
Okay, and I want to thank you and thank Mr. Willis, because also on the other front, we're working with Mr. Willis, try to make some of the policy change to help rural economic development to move forward. So I want to thank you both. Scott?
I'll just say one thing, maybe as part of the rural economic development strategy, looking at developing some sort of a quick information package for communities that might be interested in developing a BIA. Like, we look at, you see a lot of small villages no matter where you are because of larger urban centers taking over. Highways get built, they get bypassed. You just drive through upstate New York, there's a lot of lost villages. BIAs really help be that partner in a community that helps it grow, helps keep it vibrant. The Manitouk BIA, I think, has been a very good success story for the last 20 years in the village. But communities like Richmond and Stittsville have explored BIAs, and they get a lot of pushback because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what a BIA is or who controls it. They don't want the city involved. Well, the city's not really involved. So I wonder if there's a possibility there to create something that would make it more encouraging for communities to come forward and create a BIA, because a BIA would be that, that ownership inside the community, that board of directors inside the community where they're looking after their own, with their own money, to deal with, and leveraging potential grant money from other sources. So, because I think that would be helpful. I mean, I think we've seen that elsewhere, and I think it's been very difficult. There's always a couple people interested in BIAs, but then they toss it around their community, and they just hit a brick wall. We've seen a few develop in the rural area, but not a lot. And I think it would be beneficial for some of our villages to have one. And I think they could really improve the community just in terms of an aesthetics, beautification, those types of things that really make a village a village.
I agree entirely with you, Councillor. And in fact, We had what was called a COBE, the Ottawa Council of BIAs, that Councillor Al Shantiri was very much involved with. That's now sort of evolving into a nonprofit umbrella organization for all the BIAs. So we've got another group that is now getting themselves together to think a little bit more strategically, and this really lines up with that other one of our 4 pillars in our economic development strategy, which is the SMEs, the main streets, the small businesses. The stuff that is important to the city, the quality of life within the city, but are not necessarily the things in and of themselves that grow our economy, but are absolutely critical to sustaining sort of what it is that Ottawa has to offer, so that we can in fact continue to grow the economy. So very good point, and I think that's something that we definitely need to start looking at and exploring as well.
And just an example of leveraging money, the provincial government had that Main Street initiative where the city got about $900,000 from the Main Street initiative that we were able to invest in communities across the rural area, across the city. But it's about finding a partner. In that case, we needed partners to share the money with. So we gave between $40,000 and $50,000 to Manotick. Now look at communities across the area that say, well, Manotick gets everything. They have, yeah, they're organized so that they're ready when these opportunities come about. A BIA in a North Gore or a Richmond or Stittsville, they'd be able to leverage that. Osgood, Medcalf, wherever. You want, I mean, CARP has a BIA. You have 2, CARP Road Corridor and CARP. And when you have that ability to leverage those opportunities. I mean, $50,000 to a community, a small community in the rural area is significant.
That's a good point. Okay, if no other question to John, thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt, and looking forward to continue working together. And I think we have a couple of meetings already arranged, and maybe you can bring us some update to this committee at some point where you think necessary. Okay, thank you very much. On the item 3, receive. Thank you very much. And now the minute we've been waiting for, Osgood Youth, Rural Youth Mental Health Project. And does she have a presentation on the computer? Okay. Okay.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, thank you. So my name is Nicole McCarricker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Osgood Youth Association. It's a privilege to be able to speak to your committee today, so I thank you very much for the opportunity. The project that I would like to tell you about today is the Rural Ottawa Youth Mental Health Collective. So you have a document in front of you that has the details, but I'm going to sort of go over some of the highlights of that document. This is a very unique project, and it is going to be a very, very big project. There's lots of really great key players involved, and a real groundswell of interest from the community. And it's going to affect all of the rural wards in the city of Ottawa. So it's really great that I'm able to speak to the group of you about it here today. So I kind of have three main points to share with you. The first is that a group of rural youth serving organizations have identified a gap in service for rural youth, and that is to do with mental health services. This gap is something we know that it exists also for urban and suburban youth, but it's not quite as pronounced as it is for rural youth. So we've got together a quite impressive group of youth serving agencies to form a collective to tackle this issue. We have some funding currently from an organization called Innoweave, which partners together with a ministry of the provincial government and also the Laidlaw Foundation. So the members of our collaborative are under the orange tab, but just some of them to highlight for you. So the Osgood Youth Association, which I represent, is the backbone organization for this collective. We also have the Youth of Manotick Association, the Richmond Youth Center, the Youth Services Bureau, YSB, YouthNet out of CHEO, Youth Rex, which is a provincial youth evaluation organization, the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health, the Ottawa Youth Engagement Committee, the Ottawa Child and Youth Initiative, Ottawa Public Health, the Ottawa Police Service, the United Way, all of the community resource centers in the rural areas, and just recently, CHEO has come on board as well. Another collaborator that I really want to highlight is that we have a group of youth with lived experience that's part of this collective. So it's not just a group of adults that are trying to address and tackle the issue of youth, rural youth mental health, but we actually have youth that are that have suffered through mental health challenges and that are trying to access service from a rural community. They're sharing their challenges with us, sort of some of the barriers that they've encountered, and helping us to come up with solutions that are realistic and appropriate for them. So the first step, which is the step that we're engaged in right now, is an exploration phase. So again, I said this collective sort of had an idea that there was a gap in service. It's been identified to us, but what we're doing right now is exploring through a number of different ways just to really make sure that we know what we're talking about, just to make sure that the identified gap in service is an actual gap in service, and some of the steps that we can do to make the most appropriate changes. So there's 3 steps in this exploration grant phase. The first is a community needs assessment, and a very big thank you to your committee. We are doing the Osgoode Ward portion of this community needs assessment with a rural community building grant funding, so we appreciate that. That consists of online surveys and focus groups with both rural youth, and these are focus groups that are happening in all of the rural wards, and also focus groups with adults, and also one-on-one interviews with both youth and adults, again, in all of the rural wards. Catherine Morin from the Western Ottawa Community Association, they're just completing their community needs assessment. And Osgoode Ward, we're about halfway through our community needs assessment, and one is just about to start in Rideau Goulburn Ward as well. So this is going to be very interesting. It's the first time this type of community needs assessment has been done across the rural wards. We're asking very similar, if not exact same in some instances, questions. So we're really going to be able to compare that information that we're getting back between the rural wards, which is really great. There's a lot of interest in the surveys and the focus groups. All of the focus groups that we've held so far have been full to capacity with people asking for more opportunity, and we've had really great response back from the online surveys. So the reason that we're doing this, I'm almost done. The reason that we're doing this exploration grant phase is so that our next steps can be to work on these intended objectives that we've already developed, to make sure that we have the right people involved, that we're meeting with stakeholders such as yourselves, local family doctors teams, local businesses, that type of thing, to make sure that the next steps and the programs and services that we're going to offer as a result are exactly what they should be. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Can get my mic. Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. And we have Councillor Gower to start with. We have some questions for you. Obviously.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I was just curious about the timelines. You're doing the assessments, gap assessments right now.
Yes.
When do you expect to have the results, and what are some of the next steps after that?
So we're working on the timeline on an interweave timeline, as they're our primary funder at the moment. So the exploration grant phase is a 6-month phase, which went from January of this year to June of this year. So we'll be finished collecting all the information and doing the research and meeting with stakeholders by the end of June this year. And then so the way they work their granting is very interesting. They don't just give project funding. You do your project for 6 months and then you're finished. They roll out a whole bunch of different stages of funding. So right now we're in this exploration grant stage funding. And the next stage of funding is actually to pilot a number of ideas that have come out of this research phase. And I believe that pilot stage is a year. So we'll pilot a couple of different ideas that have come out of the research. And then the implementation phase is a 3 to 5 year phase, and that follows the pilot phase.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mostly, I want to thank you, Nicole, for a great presentation. And I know you and I met, and it's so nice, actually, to see initiative like this in our rural areas, not only in Osgood, and that's just so nice to see that it's actually rural-wide, and it's in Councillor Moffat and Councillor Shantiri, and I think some of Councillor Blair,
Yes.
and also Councillor Gowers, because you also, some people come from Sissville area and that rural.
Correct.
It's nice to see initiative thinking outside the box, and we thank all the effort for you and your team for doing those research and bringing all those resources to our community. My question to you will be, I know that you and I, when we met, we talked about the project. I was very impressed, and I'm very happy to see it's going to come in stages. Do you need an input? I know that I did give you an input, but you require meeting with the stakeholder, which is, I think you require meeting with each councillor here to sit down with them in their office and kind of explore, because from my meeting with you, I realized that I gave you some groups or some resources that in the community that I know, because I know lots in our community. Maybe that you have some, you want to have some similar meetings with some other councillor. Is that what your plan in the next, between now and June?
Yeah, that would be fantastic if I was able to do that. One of the things, the reason we have so many stakeholder groups involved and so many organizations on the collaboration is that we don't want to reinvent any wheels. So, if research has already been done or pilots have already been tried and either worked or failed, we want to learn from that. We don't want to sort of repeat the mistakes that have been made in the past. So the opportunity to meet with individual counselors would be very much appreciated. That way we can get your feedback, and you might know, people of influence within the city or the provincial government or stakeholder groups in your community that we should also be talking to.
Thank you, and that's a very good opportunity, because usually groups come to us, they only need money, but here it's good that you're coming. Actually, you want to also help us and help our community. So thank you very much. This is a great initiative. We appreciate all the work you and your teams putting out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Doulis. Councillor Meehan?
Thanks, Nicole. You said off the top that there is a gap in services, but what you're doing now is trying to determine the gap in the services. Just what are you learning right now? Like, what can you tell us about what's happening and what kids are experiencing in the rural areas?
I can tell you sort of a little snapshot of what we're learning, because we are just sort of about halfway through the process. But it was our assumption going into it that there was a gap in service.
Why?
The feedback that we get on the ground. So I run a youth center in rural Ottawa, and we're seeing more and more kids come through the doors of the youth center that have mental health challenges, that are having a hard time accessing services because those services are in the city core. So it's not that the services don't exist, but those services are either not coming out to the rural area to provide their service, and they also have a challenge getting into the city core to access them through multiple different transportation challenges. So we're seeing an increase in those type of comments, and it really, and then I'm seeing it from a couple of different places. I'm a parent as well, so I'm also seeing it, parents are talking with me about challenges that they're having when there's a real serious mental health concern with a youth and their family. They are actually having to take time off of work, take a leave from work, so that they can get their child back and forth to services that exist in the city core. Another thing that we're finding out, so that's just sort of helping to confirm the idea that there is this gap in service. But some of the things that we're hearing back from the youth is that they don't need a huge amount of mental health service. We're not talking about putting a psychiatric hospital in Osgood. They're just looking for more avenues of support, more education on mental health, just increasing their own mental health literacy so that they can help themselves, help their friends, help their family members. And some professional mental health counseling access in the rural villages. And again, that doesn't need to be, a 24-hour crisis center that's built in the rural village. They're really just looking for, even having access to a mental health counselor in their village sort of once a week. That's sort of some of the things that we're starting to see.
The schools are not included on the collaborative side.
They are just starting to come on board. So one of our partners is Jackie Miller from the United Way, Ottawa. And she leads their mental health team, and she works with all of the school boards and their mental health leads. So we're just at the phase now where she's starting to introduce the project to the mental health leads for all the school boards.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, thank you very much, Counselor. Thank you, Nicole. That was a good question from Councilor Meehan about the high schools, because obviously the high school is a venue where we need to be able to tap to, as you know, especially in a rural area. The high school is the hub, basically, and that was. But I'm glad you're working with the resource center, because all the resource center, they work with the high school as well, because in our area, Councilor Gower and I, the Western Ottawa Resource Center, they have council in high school as well. So if we can tap to that, like you said earlier, you're not looking to invent the wheel. You want to work with the existing program, and I think that would be a great idea if you follow up with. I know Catherine in the West Resource Center. She done a great job. She has a good relationship with the school, but I think you need to open up with the high school.
Yes, absolutely. We actually have a very good relationship with the high school and the middle school in Metcalfe. And so they're allowing us to go in and do focus groups during lunch and band practice and that type of thing right in the high school. So I 100% agree that it's a very important relationship.
Okay, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
we finally got you here, because I apologize, you were going to be in the last meeting, and I know last meeting was going to be long enough, so thank you so much for being here, Nicole.
you're
and
welcome.
for what
Thank you.
do. I guess we can receive Nicole's presentation, and we'll move to the next presentation. Received, thank you. And the next one is the Ottawa Wind Concerns. And you give us this booklet before, right? Okay. You're going to press the button, please. Just touch it. Okay, that is good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Jane Wilson, Chair of Ottawa Wind Concerns. This is my colleague and fellow North Gore resident, Michael Baggett, and some others from North Gore have joined us today. As you may recall, a wind power project was proposed in 2008 for the North Gore Richmond area, which was actually going to stretch across to Osgood if it was successful. The proponent actually failed to qualify for the last RFP that the province ran in 2014. However, in the study time, we know the project would have exposed hundreds of families in the area to environmental noise. The developer actually admitted that it was going to be noise, as it is an industrial use of the land. The majority of residents in the area did a petition which was filed with the city. But at that time, of course, according to the Green Energy Act, citizens and our municipalities had absolutely no input whatsoever to the siting process for power projects. In 2013, Ottawa City Council passed Motion 64-6, brought forward by Councillor Scott Moffat, to request that the Ontario government make the necessary legislative and or regulatory changes to provide municipalities with a substantive role in where power projects would go. The new government is making strides on that, and they have put forward several changes to regulations. They're just proposed at this point. They're not proclaimed, but they do require your attention. So we're here today to alert you to the need to look at and possibly take action to protect residents of Ottawa's rural areas in the event that industrial-scale wind power projects do come up in the future. In 2019, we know a lot more about wind power than we did back in 2008. We know that many wind turbines in Ontario were sited improperly. In fact, the Energy Minister in 2017 said that mistakes were made. He said turbines were not put in the right place. Industrial wind turbines have a high impact on the environment and on the quiet rural communities. As I said, it is an industrial use of the land. Wind power has had multiple negative effects in Ontario. The province currently has records of thousands of noise complaints which are not resolved, and there are questions about whether these regulations are properly being enforced. So the new amendments to the regulations and detailed comments are in the document that I provided there. That was a review done by Wind Concerns Ontario, of which we're a member. It was prepared by a present and past municipal councillor. There are 4, actually, but I'm just going to look at 2 today. One is that project developers will be required to assess the effects of power generation projects. The comment we add to that is that the current setbacks and noise limits for wind turbines in Ontario are not adequate. Again, they have not been changed since 2009. The document that supports the Ontario regulations is now 10 years old and does not reflect current practices around the world, including places like Germany where this all started. The World Health Organization published new noise guidelines last fall. Ontario's regulations do not meet those guidelines. You have to remember too, according to acoustics specialists, that the noise that's produced by wind turbines is different from any other kind of noise, so it's not like barking dogs or traffic. Another change to the regulation has been proposed that wind power developers must submit confirmation from local municipal governments indicating that the proposed use of the land is not prohibited by zoning bylaws. So under the Green Energy Act, municipalities had no say, so many municipalities have nothing in place to protect themselves in the future or to make any protective measures for the residents. So many existing zoning bylaws are silent on the issues of wind power projects, and changes will require municipalities to review their bylaws to reflect current views. Zoning bylaws will need to be consistent with the official plans, which may trigger changes to official plans, and provincial approval may be required. The process should be changed, in our view, to require a municipal support resolution approved by council for at least a transition period that will be required to make these necessary modifications going forward. Before municipalities are encouraged to pass zoning bylaws, which will require setback provisions, changes to noise regulations, etc., they will need to be implemented by the province as well. There are other challenges too, even with the proposed
Can you
amendments.
please wrap up, please?
Okay.
5 minutes.
We would just ask that you write to the provincial government, request a transition period, and request that setbacks be updated. Again, Ottawa as a leader was one of the 117 municipalities that asked for changes, so we're saying Ottawa has a role again to move forward in protecting communities. If there's any
Well,
questions, be happy
okay.
to answer.
Thank you very much, and I think we're lucky we have Councillor Moffat, who's your councillor, and also he's the chair of the environmental committee. So, and you have connection with the conservative too.
Some days, depends on my views on things.
It's true. Go ahead.
I just want to thank you for taking the time to come out today and for your work on this in the past and bringing attention to it, not just for Ottawa, but for municipalities across Ontario. I know there's a lot of municipalities out there that just don't have the wherewithal to, well, the residents of those municipalities don't necessarily have the wherewithal to fight some of these larger companies and some of the things that they do. So appreciate groups like yours that can do that and give them a voice. So thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. But before you go, would you be able to send this electronically to Roma, Rural Municipality of Ontario? Because you said it's only 117, but they represent 404 municipalities. So if you can send it to me, I can forward on your behalf. Because
Lovely.
I'm on the
117 is a quarter of the municipalities, but it's virtually all of them that would have been vulnerable to this type of thing. I will do that for you.
All right, thank you very much. On the item received. Okay, thank you. And are any notice of motion? None. Inquiries? None. Other business? None. Our next meeting is May 2nd, 2019. Motion to adjourn. So moved by member. Thank you very much, folks. We're adjourned.